This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. As we prepare for the Haftorah of Parshas Shelach, which is Sefer Yehoshua Perek Beis. So we have over here the Chazon David that Rabbi Yaakov Ganjian gave me, that speaks about the connection between the Haftorah and the Parsha of the week. So the connection is obvious. The Haftorah speaks about the Meraglim that Yehoshua sent out, Kalev and Pinchas, and similar to the topic of our Parsha that speaks about the Meraglim. We said on Wednesday that the reason Yehoshua sent out Pinchas and Kalev is because these two Shvatim passed the test the first time. Namely, Kalev himself passed the test, and even Yehoshua, which neshama was with Yehoshua? The neshama of Shevet Levi. And therefore, this time, Yehoshua sent out Pinchas from Shevet Levi. So let's begin with the following question, because we know that these Meraglim come, Kalev and Pinchas, and they come to the house of a woman, and her name is Rachav. He sent out these two men, and they came to an Isha Zoina, which means she was a harlot, or she was an innkeeper, which basically is the same thing, and it just makes life easier, yeah? And the king of Yericho found out that these men came to her, and he sent her a message: get these people out, because they came to spy. So where did she hide these two men? Vatitzbenoi, she hid him. What do you mean him? What about them? No, Pinchas is Elio, he doesn't need to be hid. Okay, she only hid Kalev. And she said, I don't know where they are, I don't know what you're talking about. And she brought them up to the roof, and she hid them in the linen, in the flax. So that's something we have to discuss. Why did she use pishtan to hide them? Meanwhile, she told the men, they ran out. So they chased them out of the city, but they were the whole time in the roof. And meanwhile, she went up to the roof, and she said, I know that God has given you this land, and His fear has descended and on all the residents of this country, and they're all melting away. We heard how Hashem dried up the waters of the Yam Suf when He took you out of Mitzrayim, and what He did to the two kings of the Amori, and our hearts has melted. Nobody even has the confidence and the courage to stand up against you. Ki Hashem Elokeichem Hu Elokim B'Shamayim Mimal V'Ala Oretz Mitochas. I mean, if that's a declaration, she says, Ki Hashem Elokeichem. So she says, swear to me that you only do chesed with me just like I did and I saved your life. Please save. And unesatem li ois emes. Give me a sign of truth. Give me an ois emes. The Svarim write, emes. There are three statements of humility in the Torah. What are there? Avram Avinu said, I am Afar, Vanochi Afar Va'efer. There's a statement of Efer. And then David HaMelech said, Vanochi Toilas. But Moshe and Aaron said, V'nachnu Ma. To be an Onav, you have to have the Midas HaEmes. Emes stands for Efer, Ma, Toilas. Okay. But please, she said, let my father and my mother live, my brothers and my sisters, and save them. So the men swore to her that we swear by our life that we will do chesed to you. So she let them down by a rope through the window, because her house was in the wall of the city, and she dwelt in the wall. Fine, that's the story. So Tosfos in Masechta Soita has the following question. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, which is number 17 on your sheets. Rak me'orei ha'amim ha'ila. Only from the cities of these nations, Asher Shem Elokecha noisin l'cha nachla, lo yisechaya kol neshama. We have a very nice mitzvah. Wipe out every single Kanani, without exception. You cannot let any of them live. Man, woman, child. Kill them all. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. It's a lav. To let a Canaanite live is a lav in the Torah. So what do the Jews do? The first Jews ever to come into Canaan, they go to a woman and they swear that we will not keep the Torah. We will keep you alive. So they have one mitzvah. God said, do whatever you want. It's like the Eitz Hadas. Eat anything you want, just don't eat the Eitz Hadas. God said, do whatever you want, just kill out the Canaanim. So the first thing they do when they get to Canaan is they swear that they're not going to listen to Hashem. So Tosfos says, Tema, Heich kiblua l'Rachav. How did they accept the Rachav? Sharehi haisam miknanim. Shabasoicha. She's from the Canaanim. Taisus number 2 on the sheet. It's a Taisus in Saita. I'm not making it up, okay? It's a Taisus in Saita. Taisus asks, how could they accept Rachav? K'deisa b'safri b'parshas ba'aloischa. So Taisus suggests as follows. Taisus says that V'tzarech loymar, you see 3 lines up from the widest lines. V'tzarech loymar, Oysan shahayu roitzin lahashlam koidem shehischel b'mochama rishayna. You have to say that those who wanted to make peace before any war began, they were able to be accepted. V'yaf Rachav kibla aleha koidem shehischel b'mochama. Likewise, Rachav, they accepted upon themselves before they began the war. In other words, Tosfos is saying a chiddush. The Yisur of Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama is only once the war begins. But before the first war even began, there was no prohibition of Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama. So Rachav was sort of grandfathered in before the war began. By the way, there's a Gemara Megillah, because the Gemara tells us, even though Rachav was a tremendous Zoyna, she was a Zoyna for 40 years, from the time she was 10 until the time she was 50, and she was quite experienced, and she got around, but ultimately she did some kind of tshuva, to the point where, as we're going to see, she got a pretty good shidduch. Amar of Nachman, Chulda mibnei banav shel Yeshua haisa. Chulda was a descendant of Yeshua. Ksiv hacha ben Charchavs, uksiv hasam b'timnas charas. So Gemara says, what? Chulda was a descendant of Yeshua? Eisei Rav Ina Saba Rav Nachman. Rav Ina Saba asked Rav Nachman, Shmoina Nevi'im. 8 Nevi'im, Vehem Kohanim, Yatsu Me Rachav Hazonah. 8 Nevi'im, and they're all Kohanim, came from Rachav. You know who the 8 Nevi'im that came from Rachav are? Neriah, Baruch, Shraya, Machasya, Yirmiyah, Chilkiah, Chanamel, Veshalom, Rav Yehuda Omer, Av Chulda Nevi'ah, Mibnei Baneh Shel Rachav Hazonah Hosa. But how do we know Chulda? It says here Ben Tikva. It says about Chulda she was Ben Tikva. Uchsev Hasam es Tikvas Chod Hashani. Amar le Ino Saba. V'amrila Pas Ya'uchma. Mini u'minach testayim Shmaitza. They're both true. Chulda came from Yeshua. Chulda came from Rachav. The Agaire. She converted. V'nasva Yeshua. Yeshua married her. You hear this? She's a Zayna for 40 years. She's an innkeeper, and then they get to Israel, Yeshua converts her, and he marries her. Frekt the Taisus Harash. How could he convert her? You're allowed to convert people who are Canaanim? Frekt the Taisus Harash. Afagav the Mizayin Umais Havai. So the Taisus Harash quotes Rav Yehuda Igain. Lekka mishum loisachaya kol neshama. Kivan de agaire koidem kivash haaretz miyad la'achar shiluach meraglim. He converted her immediately after the spies were sent, before they conquered the land. The Isser of conquering the land, the Isser of letting the Canaanim live, is once the war begins. Before the war, you're allowed to take converts from Canaan. Who did they take? Rachav.
But you said the same thing, the 7th line.
Correct. I know, I said that. Yeah, that's, yeah. So before the war began, they were allowed to take, that's what Tosfos says, that's what the Rosh says. Now, when did Rachav convert? So the Mefarshim say that in this conversation with Pinchas and Kalev, she articulated her Kabbalah HaMitzvahs. When she said, Vanishma, Vayimas L'Vavenu, V'loi kama oid ruach be'ish mi'penechem, Ki Hashem Eloikechem, Hu Eloikim, V'shamayim imal, V'ala oretz mitachas. The Chidah in the Tzavarei Shalal quotes Tosfos, and he quotes the answer of Tosfos that before the war began, he quotes the Rosh before the war began, and when she said Ki Hashem Eloikechem, Hu Eloikim, Hashemayim V'ala Oretz Mitachas, that was in effect her Geros. You understand? In other words, when she said that Hashem is the God in heaven and the God down here, that was her Kabbalah HaMitzvahs. That's when she accepted the mitzvahs. Okay, so we have a very interesting Mechilta. The Mechilta says, Amru, Rachav Hazonah bas eser shanim hoisa k'shiyatz Yisrael mitzrayim. Rachav was 10 years old when the Jews left Egypt. V'chol mem shana shahayu Yisrael b'midbar zansa. For the 40 years the Jews were in the desert, and she spent 40 years being mezanah. Okay? So you say, didn't she get tired after 20 years? No. She needed another 20 after that. L'soif nun shana nizgaira. When she was 50, she converted. V'hi oimeres. She said, Ribono shaloylam, b'shloisha dvarim chatasi. I sinned in 3 things. Benida, b'chala, b'hadlaka, b'imoichalmi in 3 things. B'chevel, through the rope that I used to let these meraglim go down out of my window. B'chaloin, through the window. And b'choima, shenemer, v'tiroideim b'chevel b'arachaloin, ki beisu b'ker achoima, v'choima hiyo shavas. So Rachav said, look, I've been lax in Nida, Chala, and Halakas Haner, b'moichel me through the Chevel, Chaloin, and the Choima.
Those are which was on her before she converted.
It's until she converted. What do you mean
Okay.
it was over?
Good question. We're going to see the Chidah is going to address that question. What do you mean she was lax in them? Goyim, as far as I know, do not need to bake Chala. They don't need to light the candle Friday night, and they don't have to keep Hilchos Nida. There's no din of Nida by a guy. So says the Chidah, he quotes this Mechilta. In fact, the Chidah quotes a version of the Mechilta that in the merit of her being careful in the Chevel and the Chaloin and the Choima, she was Zoicha to the 8 Nevi'im that came out of her. Says the Chidah, the Efshar Lirmois, ki begimol eila Chevel, Chaloin, Choima. There's a remez to the 3 mitzvahs that a woman is chayiv in Nida, Ner, and Chala. The Chaloin, what's a Chaloin for? To let in air, light, lener. Chevel, a rope, is like a Nida. Ki kol Nida roisha be'era kvedim alea. So a woman who's a Nida, her limbs are heavy. And Chazal say, this is a remez, Chevel k'may b'terem yavai chevel. Choima is a remez to Chala. Just like challah is the first part of the dough, so the wall is the first part of the city.
Why is the challah and the chayma separate? One thing, chevel is different. Challah is not the chaymas. Why is it 2 different things?
But you could have a wall without a window. You could have a window without a wall. And she was rewarded with 8 nevi'im. It's a remez challah. Nevi'im. So 8 nevi'im. 8 is the letter ches. That stands for challah. Nevi'im starts with a nun. That's a remez to nida. Or, which is Torah, the Nevi'im are meir in the Torah, so that's a remez to the Nevi'im. Amnam Rabim, the Torah maksha. Many in the Torah ask on the Mechilta, what in the world does Rachav mean? She sinned in these 3 things. She was a guy. Goyim don't bake challah, and even if they would, it has no tam. Goyish challah has no tam. Okay. Anyway. So let us examine, this Rachav, Taisus wanted to know, how did they let her live? She was a Kanani, you can't let a Kanani live. So now let's try to discover on a deeper level, who is this Rachav? Where is her soul from? What is her mystical origin? And perhaps we'll understand this will give us some context and background to appreciate, as we say, the rest of the story. The Chesed li Avram. Who's the Chesed li Avram? He is the grandfather of the Chidah. He's buried in Hebron, the great-grandfather of the Chidah, Avram Azulai. And he was a great Makubal, and he says that Tamar, Queen Sheba, and Rachav were 1 Gilgal. Tamar is Rashi Tevais. Tamar, Malkas Sheba, and Rachav. Okay. Therefore, Tamar gave birth to twins. Malkas Sheba had 2 children from Shloimeh, and Rachav saved 2 meraglim. And that's all the Chesed li Avram says. So what we learn is that, and I didn't make this up, okay? The Chesed li Avram says that she was rooted in the soul of Tamar. Now, the Arizal tells us further. Rachav was Nisgalgal as Chever Hakeni. We don't need that for today's share. She was also Nisgalgal as Chana. This is what it means in the Shiras Chana. Rachav pi al oivai. So, you remember that song? Rachav pi al oivai. Rachav pi al oivai. Rachav is a remez to Rachav. And Chana, okay. Chana said she's Isha Keshas Ruach. Why? Because she was first a Zoina mitzad Hakasha. Now, furthermore, says Ari, Rachav was Nimshach from the side of Kayan. Rachav emanated from the soul of Kayan. Therefore, the Arizal said, if Rachav came from Kayan, the same way Kayan was told by God that he was going to be given an ois. Look at number 12. Vayom Eloi Hashem lachein kol horei Kayin shivasayim you come vayasam Hashem lekayin ois. So too, Rachav, who was well familiar with the ois because she was rooted in Kayin, she also says V'anta hishavuna li b'Hashem ki asisi imachem chesed v'asisem gam atem in beis avi chesed unesatem li ois emes. Give me a sign of truth. So that Arizal draws a connection between the ois of Kayin and the ois of Rachav. So I found in the Sefer Birchas Chaim, who's the Birchas Chaim? That's the commentary of the Ben Ish Chai on the Haftorahs. He also quotes this Ari, but he quotes the Ari from the Shar HaGogulim, that Rachav came from the Shorish of Kayan. That's why she said, V'nasatem li ois ames, keneged what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Kayan, v'yasam Hashem l'kayin ois. Oh! Now, by the way, does anybody know what was the ois that Kayin was given? It's brought in the Tikkunim, it was the letter Vav. Therefore, now it all makes sense. Kayin's carbon was, what? What kind of carbon did Kayin bring? Mi pri ho adama. What did he bring? Pishtan. By the way, the Pirkei de Rebbe Lezer says that the reason for shatnez, right, is Hevel's carbon was mi b'chayret soinoi, wool. Kayin's carbon was mi pri adama pishtan. So you can't mix Kayin and Hevel together. Okay? Now, therefore, since she came from Kayin, she hid these meraglim in flax. What was the ois of Kayin? The letter? Vav. So she brings them up to the? Gag. What's it?
336.
Gag and Gag is a Vav, right? So she brings them up to the Gag. Kim Gag Mispar Vav. That was the ois of Kayin. Therefore, she hid him in the Gag. Okay?
Down on a rope, which is a rope. Right? The rope is a rope.
Okay. That's what, again, the Ben Ish Chai says. Back to the Chidah. Back to the Chidah and the Tzavrei Shalom. So he says you could say Derech Drush and Remez. That he quotes the Ari, that Rachav was the Gilgal of Tamar. And the same way Tamar gave birth to two children, Paretz and Zarach, Rachav saved two Meraglim. And it's like she gave birth to them, because if you raise a yasam in your house, it's like you raise them, right? Kol hamagado yasam b'tach beisoy mala v'kasav ki'ilu hu yoladai, or kol hamalame ben chaveroi Torah ki'ilu yoladai. At the bar mitzvah, I think of Rabbi Rucham. So a gadol came out to Rabbi Rucham, and he said Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov on yoladai, and Mazel Tov on ki'ilu yoladai. Because he's your real son, and you taught him Torah, so you get a double Mazel Tov. So anyway, Rachav was considered having given birth to these two Meraglim. Likewise, the Chesed Avram says that Rachav is from the Shorish of Kayin. Therefore, she asked for an ois emes. Now I'm going to say over a Zohar, which is quoted by many of the Mefarshim, that Simna de Moshe Bas Minayhu. That's a common Zohar that is quoted regarding the ois that Rachav asked for. And therefore, since Rachav was a Gilgal of Tamar and from the root of Kayan, and by the way, the Ari says she also came from Chana, right? Chana was the Gilgal of Rachav. And then he quotes Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, Chava is Gematria Chana, B'mispar Katan. Basically, what does this all tell us? That this Rachav was no ordinary lady. She wasn't Stam. Who is she? A Zoyna Rachav. She's later Chana. She's before Tamar. She's misoid kayan, and therefore, when she told Yoshua and Kalev, hide here for 3 days, she said it Baruch HaKodesh. And therefore, when she said she was lax in the Gimel mitzvahs, somehow she realized that in one of her gogulim there was a certain laxness or a laxity. Therefore, Chana, her gilgul, stands for Chala Nida Hadlaka. Okay, now the Chidah takes it to the next level.
If they were hiding in her house for 3 days and then they left, what opportunity do they have to do any spying?
Plan B. They wanted to kill him. What do you say?
I have an answer. I think that when they heard her declaration that the people in the land were afraid, that basically accomplished their mission. And then the last pasuk of the Haftorah, they actually report back to Yoshua that Hashem nasan lanu, Hashem has given us the land, because they heard from her that it's been done already.
All right, I'll buy that. Right? So with this you can answer Tosfos' kasha. Again, Tosfos' kasha was what? What? Tosfos' kasha was what? How could they accept Rachav? Rachav was from the Canaanim. It says, Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama.
That was before the Gezerah was to kill everyone.
Oh, that's Tosfos' answer, but we're not using that answer. Another question is, the Chidah interprets...
When the Bnei Israel were Kodesh is Eretz Yisrael, weren't some Goyim allowed to live there if they accepted Shavim B'nai Noach and the authority of... Right?
No. The Nesinim said we're from a faraway land. Why? Because anyone from Canaan, they had to destroy them. So another question that the Zohar, that the Chidah wants to know is, he interprets the Zohar that when Rachav asked for the Siman of Moshe Rabbeinu, that meant she wanted to ascend from the lowest point in spirituality to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. How could she ask for such a thing? Furthermore, she converted and Yeshua married her. Yeshua, how's that going to look? They go into Eretz Yisrael. Moshe dies, and all of a sudden Yeshua is not married. And who does he choose to marry? The most acclaimed mistress in the history of the world, Rachav Hazonah. How's that going to look for Klal Yisrael? Mr. Heimwood says it's not going to look good, right? So, based on the above, we could answer as follows: she had a very holy neshama. She was the Gilgal of Tamar. She was the Soid of Kayan, and she's not Bechlal Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama. This is very interesting to me. This is the one lav where the Torah says Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama. All of a sudden we have to look at the neshama. We have to look at the neshama. So we say like this: Mitzad gufa, mitzad her body, she did whatever Chazal say that she did. Ki im lamari inayim hagufa kasha. Doesn't she come from the 7 amamin? By the way, Tosfos in Megillah suggests maybe she wasn't from the 7 amamin, but the Sifri says explicitly not like that. So the Chidah says, since her neshama was originated in Klal Yisrael, she converted. She's not included in Lo Yisachai Kol Neshama. When the Sifri says she's from the Zayin Amamim, it means her guf. Therefore, she was Misoid Kayan. She wanted the Siman of Moshe. By the way, Moshe we know was Hevel, and she came from Kayan. And therefore, Yoshua married her, because Yoshua recognized Oitzam Gedulas Nishmasa. And Yoshua recognized the greatness of her soul. It could be there was even a connection between the soul of Yeshua and her soul. Because we see that where did Yoshua get the Yud from? He got it from Sarai. And Sarai gave Yoshua the Yud. And Sarah came to Masakein, the sin of Chava. How? By being Masakein the 3 mitzvahs. Okay. Now, the Chidah says, after some time, I saw that from the words of Rashi and Zvachim on Kuf Yud Vav, it's mashma, that his gersa in the Mechilta is, I sinned with the rope and the window by letting people down who came to live with me. So therefore, Kasav b'sefer zeh yenachamenu. The pirush is that he says that our gersa is a mistake. V'shamro isi la Rav Seder Hadoros. Shehevi mashakasav di Chezkel yatsa meirachav. He brings an opinion of the Seder Hadoros that Yechezkel also emanated from Rachav Hazonah, but he writes on it that this is false.
Somebody wrote that it's false, but he say you must still think it's right because Chayech, what you ask for to see, Yechezkel will see.
Okay, so here the Chida doesn't quite challenge it. He quotes from the Shalshelas HaKabbalah, which the Chida often says the Shalshelas HaKabbalah is not a reliable sefer. So he quotes that the Shalshelas HaKabbalah suggests that Yechezkel Hanavi emanated from Rachav. So if you look in the Midbar Kedemos, in number 14, he quotes in the last paragraph, Amnam Al Derech HaEmes Hakol Mesukan the Kasa Rabbeinu Ari the Rachav Hoysa Gilgal Tamar Misoid Kayin. Rachav was the reincarnate of Tamar from the secret of Kain. Chumash Tamar Yalda Shnayim Paretz V'Zarach. So too Rachav saved the two Meraglim. Okay. Mikamakim Nishmasa Gedoyla Nishmas Yisraelis Gavaya Gavaya Zois Kaimas Adam Samar, that from which David and Shlomo came and all the Malchus based David. So she's not included in Lois Sechaya Kal Neshama, and therefore she asked for the Siman of Moshe who is Hevel. Okay, and Yoshua married her Le'iloi Nishmasa. Okay, for her Neshama. Then Sheyatzu menu neviim v'gam Yechezkel hanavi, like it says in the Medrash Huva b'Yalkut. So in this scenario, interestingly, the Chida quotes that in fact Yechezkel hanavi did come from Rachav, and this is supported by the Medrash in Rus Rabbah and the Yalkut, and this was sort of hidden and sealed from the Seder Hadoros, because the Seder Hadoros writes that the Shalshelas HaKabbalah says Yechezkel came from Rachav, and the Seder Hadoros says about the Shalshelas HaKabbalah that he was wrong. Says the Chida, no, in this case, the Shalshelas HaKabbalah was correct, that in fact Yechezkel Hanavi did come from Rachav HaZonah. Interesting. Anyway, if we look at number 16, the Birchas Chaim of the Ben Ish Chai says that it's well known what the Chida says in the name of the Talmid Ari, that Rachav had a holy neshama, and she was the Gilgal of Tamar, and just like Tamar had two, so too Rachav. Says the Ben Ish Chai, with this I could explain the Psukim in Parshas Vayishlach. In Vayishlach it says, Ha'anoshim ha'ela shalemim hemitanu, v'yeshu b'aretz, v'yischaru oisa, v'ha'aretz hinei rachavas yadayim lefnehem. Says the Ben Ish Chai, Ramaz b'divrayim, Allah. Uchsiv oy lo yadu ki soifam l'reshas ha'aretz. What they were basically saying was, we don't know, that we didn't know that you will ultimately inherit the land. But Rachavas Yodayim, through Rachav, who are in the Yosias of Rachavas, there will be Yodayim, meaning place, Lifnehem, when the Meraglim come. So, be it as it may, we learn from here that Rachav somehow was able to escape the fate of the typical Kanani, which is Loisachai Kal Neshama, either as Tosis and the Rosh says that she survived before the war began, or as the Chida says that somehow Kabbalistically, because she emanated from the root of Klal Yisrael and from holy souls, they were able to save her because it's Loisachai Kal Neshama. Her guf was perhaps on a lower level, but her soul was able to soar to the heavens, and therefore ultimately she was Zoicha that Yoshua married her, and 8 Nevi'im came out of her, possibly including Yechezkel. The only thing is that the Gemara says that 8 Nevi'im came out of her. Why doesn't the Gemara say that Yechezkel came out of her, if in fact, as the Shalshelas HaKabbalah says, that she did? But we see that Rachav sort of went from the lowest of the lows, and she elevated herself to the point where she ended up marrying Yoshua, and she became Ima of many Nevi'im and Klal Yisrael, Rabbi Isai. Have a great Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.